Carla adjusted her robe over her shoulders for the last time that week. The weight of the fabric was a constant reminder of the responsibilities she carried as a judge. To many, she was a model of success, a black woman in one of the most respected positions in the country. However, there were days when, behind that authority, Carla felt the weight of something even more complex. The daily struggle for respect in a society that did not always see beyond her skin color. That Friday afternoon, she decided she needed a break. After 5 intense days of hearings and difficult decisions, Carla just wanted a moment of normality, away from the gazes of the prosecution and defense. She decided to do something simple, buy a birthday present for her nephew, Miguel, who would be 8 that weekend. The boy always looked forward to his presents, and Carla liked to surprise him with something special. She put her robe away in her office closet and went out wearing casual clothes, something comfortable. Without the symbol of her position, Carla felt like just another ordinary person. She got in her car and drove to a convenience store in a neighborhood near where she grew up, a place where she still felt connected to her roots. As she entered the store, she felt the familiar atmosphere she loved so much. The store was small but well organized, with shelves of toys, books, and games that immediately made her think of Miguel. She headed to the toy aisle and began to browse through the selections. She felt relaxed, as if the pressures of her job had been left behind, if only for a few minutes. While analyzing a game that she knew Miguel would love, Carla didn't immediately notice the looks around her. She was so absorbed in her own routine, without a robe, without the title of judge, that for a moment she allowed herself to forget the position she occupied in society. There, in that hallway, she was just a loving aunt, looking for the perfect gift for her nephew. And it was in that moment of relaxation that everything began to change. As Carla scanned the shelves in search of the perfect gift, she began to feel a subtle unease. Something was wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The surroundings that had seemed so familiar and welcoming just minutes before now felt strangely uneasy. Slowly, she realized that a man in a police uniform had entered the store and was watching her intently. He walked around the place, as if he were on a routine patrol, but his eyes always seemed to return to Carla, as if he were trying to assess her. She ignored it at first, thinking it might just be a coincidence. But as he got closer, the weight of his gaze became more evident. Something about the way he looked at her wasn't simply professional, but suspicious, as if she represented some kind of threat. Carla looked away, trying to focus on the present. She knew that looks like that were not uncommon, especially for a black woman in environments where she was not expected, or where she did not fit the profile of people considered good. However, the discomfort began to grow. She knew that this feeling was not unfounded. The policeman approached, watching her closely, and then walked around the hallway. Carla pretended to remain focused on the toys, but now the lightness of her task had been replaced by a growing tension. She was no longer just an aunt buying a gift. She had become, in the man's eyes, a suspect. She took a deep breath and tried to focus. Nothing is going to happen, she thought, trying to calm herself. But deep down, she knew the encounter was just beginning. The silence in the store was interrupted by the sound of the police officer's footsteps approaching. Carla felt his presence before she even saw him beside her. She took a deep breath, controlling her nervousness, while pretending to continue observing the toys. But the calm was short-lived. "Excuse me, ma'am." His voice was firm and authoritative. Carla turned slowly, meeting the police officer's cold, suspicious gaze. "Yes?" she replied, keeping her voice calm despite the tension she felt inside. "Can I see your documents?" he asked, without explaining why. The request took Carla by surprise. She knew she was legally entitled to question the reason for his request, but there was something in his manner that made her hesitate. There was an insinuation, a clear prejudice, as if she was doing something wrong just by being there. She didn't want to make the situation worse, so, remaining calm, she reached for her wallet in her purse. "Here you go," she said, handing the ID to the police officer, who took it with disdain, barely looking at her. He examined the document for a moment, then looked back at her, clearly suspicious. "What are you doing here?" he asked, completely ignoring the profession printed on the identity card he was holding. "I'm buying a present for my nephew," Carla replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. The policeman gave a short, dry laugh, as if his answer were absurd. "Are you sure?" he replied. "It seems like it's taking a long time for someone who just wants to buy a gift." Carla felt the tension building inside her. The lack of respect and humiliation implied in his words was evident. She knew she was being judged in a way that had nothing to do with her actions, but rather with who he perceived her to be. Still, she tried to maintain her composure. "I'm not in a hurry," he replied, unfazed. "I'm just looking for the right gift." But inside, she knew the situation was about to get worse. The police officer did not seem satisfied with Carla's answer. His gaze hardened, and he made a sudden gesture, drawing the attention of the few people in the store. The already tense atmosphere began to fill with murmurs. Nearby customers began to watch the scene with interest, their eyes filled with curiosity and prejudice. "I think it's best if you come with me," the police officer said, taking a step forward, further reducing the space between them. Carla lifted her chin, feeling the injustice of the situation begin to boil inside her. The officer's tone was not a request. It was an order, something she, as a judge, recognized immediately. She knew that if she wasn't careful, the situation could get out of control. Her body, which had been relaxed minutes before, was now on alert. "May I know the reason?" Carla asked, keeping her voice firm. "We received a report about someone behaving suspiciously in this store," the police officer replied, without giving further details. Carla felt her heart race. It was an empty pretext, an excuse used to justify an action based on nothing more than veiled racism. She had heard of situations like this before, but she had never imagined that she would be at the center of one of them. And worse, she knew that, without his robe and the symbol of his authority, that man did not see a judge. He saw only a black woman, someone who, to him, did not belong there. "I'm a judge," Carla said, looking the police officer straight in the eye. Her words were clear, filled with the confidence she had cultivated over years of struggle and study. The policeman hesitated for a moment, surprised. He looked at the document in his hand again, this time more carefully, and the realization began to sink in. But instead of backing down, his pride took over. He looked around, noticing the eyes on him, and instead of admitting his mistake, he persisted. "Judge or not, you'll have to come with me," he said, his voice taking on an even more aggressive tone. The humiliation of being treated like that in public was a heavy blow to Carla. Frustration and anger began to take over, but she knew she couldn't lose control. There was more at stake here than just her pride. She took a deep breath, deciding that this moment would not define her, but rather, it would be a turning point. Carla, even though she was under pressure from the situation and surrounded by curious eyes, knew that this was a crucial moment. The police officer, stubborn in his mistake, was not only abusing his authority, but also underestimating the strength of the person he was confronting. Carla took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all the battles she had fought throughout her life. She knew that she had already overcome greater challenges. She adjusted her posture, revealing the authority she carried with her, even without the toga. Her gaze was now firm and impassive, while the words came out clearly. "I am Dr. Carla Antunes, a judge at the Court of Justice, and you are embarrassing me for no reason. You know very well that I have not committed any crime, but you still insist on humiliating me publicly." Carla's words echoed throughout the room, and the people around her fell into absolute silence. The police officer looked around, noticing that the customers were now looking at him with more curiosity than she was. The tension in the air increased as he tried to process the situation. He had not expected that this woman who, until a few minutes ago, had seemed like a simple civilian, was, in fact, a person with so much power. For a moment, Carla could see the hesitation and discomfort growing in the officer. An awkward silence enveloped him as he realized the mistake he had made. He knew he had crossed a dangerous line, but his pride still held him back. There was no way to back out without completely losing his credibility. "Okay, Dr. Carla," he said, still trying to maintain control of the situation. "You can go on your way." Carla remained firm, but she knew that moment was not over. Carla left the store with heavy steps, her heart still pounding with the adrenaline of the confrontation. The gift for Miguel was forgotten, abandoned on the shelves. The feeling of humiliation and injustice hung over her like a dark cloud. What was supposed to be a moment of lightness and relaxation had turned into a painful and exhausting experience. Getting into her car, Carla started the engine and began driving back home. The street she passed seemed different now, as if everything around her was reflecting her own anguish. The people walking on the sidewalks, the sound of cars passing by, everything seemed distant and irrelevant compared to the inner turmoil she felt. When she got home, Carla threw herself on the couch, unable to do anything else. Her thoughts revolved around what had happened, and a mixture of frustration and sadness overcame her. How could someone who had dedicated her life to fighting for justice and equality be treated with such disrespect? The pain came not only from the confrontation itself, but from the painful recognition that, despite her status and accomplishments, she was still viewed through the lens of stereotypes and prejudices. She wondered if her work had been in vain. If even in a position of power, discrimination could still prevail. The struggle she faced that day seemed to be a cruel reminder that prejudice was a persistent shadow, and that even her achievements were no immunity from it. As Carla reflected on the experience, she felt consumed by the desire to turn her pain into something positive. She knew she couldn't let this incident define her. Instead, she needed to find a way to use this experience to fight against the injustices that still permeated society. In the days that followed, Carla tried to get back to her routine with the same determination as always, but the humiliation of the store still haunted her. She knew she had to face the situation head-on, not only for her own good, but to ensure that similar injustices would not be tolerated. This moment could be a turning point, not only for her, but for others who faced silent discrimination. Determined to take action, Carla reached out to the local press and decided to share her experience. She wanted her voice to be heard and for the situation to be exposed not just as an isolated act, but as a reflection of a broader, more systematic issue. She prepared a thoughtful statement, addressing both the personal impact and the broader context of racial discrimination. On the morning of the interview, Carla prepared with a mix of anxiety and determination. She knew she was about to open an important dialogue, and she hoped her courage would inspire others to stand up against injustice. The cameras were ready, and the reporters were waiting with rapt attention. As she began to speak, Carla felt a wave of relief and empowerment. She recounted the details of what had happened in the store, describing how she had been treated with disrespect and how the experience had made her reflect on the state of society. She spoke of the psychological and emotional impact and how, despite her role as a judge, she was still the target of prejudice. The response was immediate. Media coverage brought the issue of racial discrimination to the forefront and sparked a broader debate about the treatment of Black people in different contexts. Carla's courage not only exposed an important issue, but also started a much-needed conversation about respect and equality. As the debate raged on, Carla began to feel a renewed sense of purpose. Her experience, though painful, had become a platform for change. She knew the road ahead was long, but she was determined to continue fighting for justice, now with a new perspective and a deeper sense of her mission. After her experience was exposed in the media, Carla saw an increase in support from the community. Many congratulated her for her courage and expressed solidarity. The messages of support she received were a mix of encouraging words and similar stories of discrimination. It was clear that Carla's experience resonated with many and that her voice was contributing to a broader conversation about racism and injustice. Carla used this momentum to start a project she had been considering for some time, a nonprofit organization focused on defending civil rights and combating racial discrimination. The project was well received, and she soon found herself involved in a busy and rewarding job. Her focus was to provide legal and emotional support to people facing discrimination and injustice, as well as to promote civil rights education. The organization began to gain recognition and support. Carla and her team organized workshops, lectures, and community events to raise awareness and provide resources to those in need. The work was not easy, and the challenges were many, but Carla felt a renewed sense of purpose and accomplishment. As Carla reflected on the impact of her work, she realized that the painful experience in the store had been a catalyst for significant change. The incident had forced her to confront the harsh reality of discrimination, but it had also given her the opportunity to turn her pain into positive action. As the organization grew, Carla felt more connected to her community and her mission to create a more just world. Although the path was full of obstacles, she was ready to face them, knowing that her fight was part of a larger movement for equality and respect.